5 red flags of emotional manipulation everyone misses. You've never been controlled by force. No one ever pinned you down. No one threatened you into submission. No one told you who you were allowed to be. Instead, someone stood close enough to influence you and made you believe every adjustment you made was your own idea. And the most dangerous part, you thanked them for it. Because emotional manipulation doesn't arrive looking like control. It doesn't shout, it doesn't command, it doesn't demand obedience. It smiles, it listens, it nods, it waits. It presents itself as understanding, as safety, as emotional intelligence. Most people imagine manipulation as something obvious. The explosive partner, the cruel parent, the openly toxic friend, the boss who intimidates. But the reality is quieter, more refined. Emotional manipulation survives not because it is loud, but because it feels reasonable. It hides inside affection, inside concern, inside vulnerability. And the red flags that expose it are rarely dramatic. They are subtle shifts in emotional gravity. So subtle you don't notice yourself adjusting until you've already moved. This is not a story about villains. It's a story about patterns. Patterns that slowly reorganize how you think, how you feel, and eventually, how you behave. And most people don't notice them until they are already living inside them. Emotional manipulation almost always begins with something that feels good. Connection, understanding, the sense that someone finally gets you. In the early stages, nothing feels wrong. In fact, it often feels unusually right. They listen carefully. They remember details. They mirror your language. They validate your emotions. You feel seen. And because you feel seen, you lower your guard. That's not weakness. That's human. But manipulation doesn't start with harm. It starts with positioning. And the first position it seeks is emotional leverage. Red flag. Number 1, selective vulnerability. It begins with disclosure. They tell you something personal, something painful, something that feels intimate. A story about trauma, a past betrayal, an insecurity they claim they rarely share. It feels like trust, and your nervous system responds automatically. You soften. You become careful. You want to protect them. Vulnerability creates psychological gravity. When someone reveals pain, the natural response is empathy. And empathy lowers defenses. You don't want to hurt them. You don't want to trigger something. You don't want to be another person who misunderstands them. Without realizing it, you adjust. But selective vulnerability is not mutual vulnerability. They reveal just enough to anchor you emotionally, while remaining surprisingly undefined themselves. You know their pain, but not their patterns. Their wounds, but not their boundaries. Their struggles, but not their limits. You feel close, but when asked to describe them clearly, you struggle. The intimacy feels real, but it is asymmetrical, and asymmetry is leverage. Because once you feel responsible for someone's emotional safety, you become easier to influence, not through fear, through care. Over time, this imbalance becomes the emotional baseline. You are the one holding space, understanding, accommodating. They remain fragile, complex, hard to pin down. And because their vulnerability arrived first, it feels unfair to question them. After all, they trusted you. Or at least, that's how it feels. Red flag number 2, manufactured self-doubt. This one is rarely obvious. It doesn't look like gaslighting at first. It looks like clarification, a small correction in tone, a gentle reinterpretation of events, a calm disagreement about what really happened. That's not what I meant. You're reading into it. You're overthinking. You're being too sensitive. Notice the pattern. Your emotional response becomes the issue, not their behavior. The conversation subtly shifts away from what happened, toward how you reacted to it. At first, you defend yourself. You explain. You clarify. You try to be precise. But over time, something changes. You begin pre-editing your emotions before expressing them. You pause before speaking. You soften your language. You add disclaimers. I might be wrong, but maybe I'm just tired, but I don't know if this makes sense. You question your memory, your tone, your interpretation. The manipulation is not in denying reality outright. It is in gently destabilizing your confidence in perceiving it. And once self-doubt is installed, control no longer requires effort, because you start doing the work for them. You replay conversations alone. You analyze what you said. You wonder if you imagined the tension. And when something feels off, you hesitate to name it. Because what if you're wrong? What if you're being unfair? What if you're the problem? That hesitation becomes a powerful silence. Red flag number 3, conditional warmth. This one trains behavior. Affection becomes rhythmic, present, then withdrawn. Connection appears when you align. Distance appears when you don't. There is no argument, no confrontation, no explicit punishment, just absence. The human nervous system is highly sensitive to inconsistency. Intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism behind gambling addiction, is one of the strongest conditioning tools known. When warmth is unpredictable, attention intensifies. You don't pull away. You lean in. You search for patterns. You analyze what you did wrong. You look for the version of yourself that restores connection. And slowly, behavior shifts, not because you were told to change, but because you learned what keeps love accessible. You become more agreeable, more careful, more emotionally efficient. You start anticipating their reactions. Before speaking, you check the room. Before expressing frustration, you soften it. Before being honest, you consider the cost. Not because you're afraid, but because you're adapting, and adaptation feels mature. Red flag number 4, moral framing. This one feels virtuous. They don't control you. They appeal to values. If you cared about us, a good partner would. I just thought you were different. I wouldn't do that to someone I love. The language matters. They're not asking for compliance. They're measuring your character. Disagreement becomes evidence of selfishness. Boundaries become a lack of commitment. Independence becomes emotional immaturity. Moral framing converts preference into principle. What they want becomes what a good person would choose. And once morality enters the conversation, resistance feels wrong. You comply not out of fear, but out of identity preservation. Because you don't want to be the kind of person who hurts someone, or abandons them, or fails them emotionally. So you adjust again. Over time, you stop asking what you want. You ask what kind of person you should be, and that question quietly replaces the first. Red flag number 5, subtle isolation. This one never announces itself. It doesn't say, "Don't see them." It starts with doubt. They don't really support you. I just notice how they talk to you. I worry they don't want what's best for you. They seem jealous. Concern, not control. But gradually, your external mirrors become distorted. Friends feel less safe to confide in. Family seems less understanding. Other perspectives feel less accurate. The manipulator positions themselves as the most reliable interpreter of your world. And isolation doesn't require physical distance. It only requires narrative dominance. When their voice becomes the loudest interpretation of reality, alternative perspectives fade quietly, and without alternative perspectives, there is no friction, only influence. None of these red flags feel catastrophic on their own. That is the point. Manipulation operates through accumulation. Selective vulnerability builds trust. Manufactured self-doubt weakens perception. Conditional warmth trains behavior. Moral framing reshapes identity. Subtle isolation removes counterbalance. Each mechanism reinforces the others, until your emotional environment is calibrated around someone else's stability, and you call it love, or loyalty, or understanding. The uncomfortable truth is this:
emotional manipulation does not succeed because people are weak.
It succeeds because people are empathetic, because they value harmony, because they want connection, because they assume mutual intention. The traits you are most proud of, patience, depth, emotional awareness, are the very traits that make subtle control possible. And somewhere along the way, you stopped evaluating how you feel and started evaluating how you are perceived. You measure your tone. You adjust your reactions. You anticipate their mood before entering the room, not out of fear, but out of adaptation. And adaptation, repeated long enough, becomes personality. Here is what makes emotional manipulation so difficult to detect. It rarely feels like losing control. It feels like becoming better, more understanding, more mature, less reactive. Self-silencing can look like growth. Self-doubt can masquerade as humility. Over-accommodation can feel like love. When control is internalized, the manipulator becomes unnecessary. You regulate yourself. You pre-comply. You defend them to others. The system sustains itself, and by the time tension becomes visible, it feels too integrated to question. The most unsettling realization is not that someone manipulated you. It's recognizing how naturally you adapted, how quickly you optimized yourself for approval, how easily your emotional compass recalibrated around another person's comfort. No one forced you. No one locked the door. The architecture was psychological, and it was gradual. Emotional manipulation does not always come from villains. Sometimes it comes from insecurity, from fear of abandonment, from patterns learned long before you arrived. But intent does not erase impact, and awareness does not require accusation, requires observation. The red flags were never dramatic. They were distortions, small bends in emotional reality that accumulated over time. And once you see them, you cannot unsee the pattern. The most powerful manipulation is the one that convinces you your silence was maturity.